Good evening, one and all. So let us start with today's NCF session. Yes. Mm, Let me share the screen. As we have successfully finished chapter 1 and chapter 2, now we are going to start with chapter 3. So chapter 3 is all about approach to learning standards, content, pedagogy, and assessment. In chapter 1, we have seen aims of school education. In chapter 2, we have seen how the four stages of the school has been divided. So in this chapter, we are going to see how the approach taken by NCF towards defining learning standards, selection of content, methods of teaching and assessments to achieve these aims. Okay, in the four stages, we are going to explore that. So 3.1 is approach towards learning standards. Education can be seen both as a process and as an outcome. In the first chapter, we have seen that education is a process wherein we are giving all round and holistic development. So, in this chapter, he is adding one more point to it. Education is also an outcome. What outcome? It's an outcome for the process. When we view education as an outcome, we think about a student's achievement of the desirable knowledge, capacities, values, and dispositions as derived from the aims of school education. So we know what are the knowledge, capacities, values, and dispositions required by the child to inculcate, isn't it? Those are mentioned in the first chapter. So those are the outcomes of education. To bring clarity to all stakeholders on what students must achieve in school, this NCF has articulated these desired educational achievements as learning standards. Okay, in the first chapter, we have seen, we have looked at them as desired educational achievements. They are nothing but the learning standards over here. Okay, goal clarity or clarity of objectives is a critical element for success in any endeavor. Learning standards are intended to provide such clarity in school education to all participants and stakeholders. Stakeholders are none other than teachers, students, educational functionaries, parents, and society as a whole. So, to be successful in any game, we need to know the goal. What are we supposed to hit? Isn't it? In education, also, these learning standards are going to tell the goals that we need to achieve. If we achieve the goals as mentioned in learning standards, then the child will be successful in achieving what has been quoted in chapter 1. Okay, so that's just a second, teachers. Yeah, thank you, teachers. There was something that I had to address. Yes. Yes. So all the stakeholders, including teachers and the management and the complete society, should know what are these learning standards are. Okay. While providing and having such clarity has many aspects, three things are critical. So what is the clarity that we should have? Let us explore that. There are basically three things that we need to know. Any such objective must be at a level of detail and time horizon, that the person using it should be able to relate to it and to draw relevant actions. For example, a preparatory stage language teacher would require goals that are to be achieved by the end of the stage in language, and only having goals at the end of schooling will not be helpful to them. Most parents would be able relate to goals that are for the particular age of their child, and would find it difficult to relate to the aims of education as goals in useful manner. Yesterday also in one of the session I was talking about the smart goals. Okay, so here we are talking about smart goals. For example, I am a teacher who is teaching children from children of third, fourth, fifth classes. So I should have a specific goals and specific learning standards which I need to achieve within this stage. The same way, every teacher should have a goal as per the stages. Even parents should know about that particular goal. All such objectives must be derived from the aims of education and together must achieve the aims. This is operationalized by the process of rigorous flow down as mentioned later in this chapter. So we are going to see the flow down within some time. Okay. So these objectives we should know very well. And according to those aims only we are supposed to work. The entire set of objectives must be conjunct, consistent, and connected, which would be essential to achieving the aim. So all the objectives are to be connected to each other. Okay, and it should be like a flow, slowly from one step to another step. Then only we can achieve the aims that have been mentioned in chapter 1. These objectives, starting from aims of school education, are referred to as learning standards in NCF. Right from aims of education to the learning outcomes, everything is mentioned as a learning standard. The first section below defines a few terms used in this NCF in the context of learning standards, and then gives an approach to arriving at this learning standard. Okay, so these are all the like terms used for learning standards. Let us explore them. See, from aims of education, you get curricular aims. From curricular aims, you get competencies for each curriculum, each curricular area. And from those particular competencies, you get the learning outcomes. Okay, so this is the flow down. Moving further, definitions. Let us see what is aims of school education. Aims are educational vision statements that give broad direction to all deliberate efforts of educational systems like curricular development, institutional arrangements, funding and financing, people's capacities, and so on. So these are all the efforts of educational system. What is aims of school education? It is a vision statement, okay, which is giving a direction to all these efforts, which means there is a statement. Okay, we are supposed to achieve that particular statement. Okay, all these things like curriculum, institutional arrangement, they are supposed to work or strive towards reaching to that statement. That is nothing but aims of school education is. Aims of school education are usually directed by education policy documents. Okay, as per the policy documents, the aims of education are framed. The NCF has derived the aims of education from NEP 2020, and these aims were articulated in Chapter 1. So we have seen it in Chapter 1. What are the aims of school education? These aims of education are to be achieved through the gaining and development of knowledge, capacities, values, and dispositions. It's a process which goes on together, which guide the aims within each of the subject areas or study. Okay, so each subject area has got something to do with the aims of school education. What are curricular goals? Curricular goals are statements that give directions to curriculum development and implementation. So, curricular goals will help in developing a curriculum and the implementation of a curriculum. They are derived from aims and are specific to a stage in education. For example, foundation stage. See, aims of school education is for throughout the school. Coming to curricular goals, they are specific to each stage. Okay. And curricular goals are derived from the aims of school education. This NCF, which would guide the development of all curricula, lists and states the curricular goals for each stage. Okay, for each stage, we have a separate set of curricular goals. For example, develops effective communication skills for day-to-day interaction in two languages is such curricular goal for foundation stage. In this way, we will be having curricular goals for each stage and each subject. Competencies. What are competencies? They are learning achievements that are observable and can be assessed systematically. We were talking yesterday also, no? Board should conduct exams to assess the competencies, whether the child has met the required competencies or not. Okay. So it is about stage-wise competency. Every class, what is the competency in one particular subject that the child has to achieve. These competencies are derived from the curricular goals and are expected to be attained by the end of a stage. So from aims, we get the curricular goals, and from curricular goals, we get the competencies. Competencies are articulated in curriculum frameworks, including this NCF. Even in NCF, there are many competencies mentioned, which we are going to explore further. However, curriculum developers can adapt and modify the competencies to address specific contexts for which the curriculum is being developed. Okay, there is a small, like leverage that we can also develop specific, competencies if needed for that particular age group. The following are examples of some of the competencies derived from the above curricular goal in this NCF. From the above curricular goal, which we just discussed, there is a competency that has been mentioned here. Converses fluently and can hold a meaningful conversation and understands oral instruction for a complex task and gives clear oral instruction for the same to others. Now let us compare both of the statements, okay? Here what is said, develops effective communication skills for day-to-day interaction in two languages. It's just a statement, a goal. It is not measurable, whereas the competency is measurable. See, converses fluently and can hold a meaningful conversation. This we can see, we can experience whether the child is doing or not. And understands oral instruction for a complex task. This also is experiential and gives clear oral instruction for the same to others. This is also measurable. Okay. So curricular goal is just a statement, whereas competency is a measurable piece of achievement. Moving further, learning outcomes. Competencies are attained over a period of time. Therefore, interim markers of learning achievements are needed so that teachers can observe and track learning and respond to the needs of learners continually. So, learning outcomes are something which are used for tracking the learning properly throughout the stage of learning. These interim markers are called learning outcomes. Thus, learning outcomes are granular milestones of learning and usually progress in a sequence, leading to the attainment of competency. So, learning outcome is nothing but the breakdown of competency. Okay, so four learning outcomes together is one competency. Okay, that's how it is. So, the whole thing, the aim of school education is chunks. We have broken it into chunks. Thus, learning outcomes enable teachers to plan their content, pedagogy, and assessment towards achieving specific competencies. So these learning outcomes, all the teachers should know because based upon that only teacher is supposed to prepare her plan, lesson plan, pedagogy, and assessment. Curriculum developers and teachers should have the autonomy to define learning outcomes as appropriate to their classroom context while maintaining clear connection to the competencies. Many a times, as competencies are quoted by NCF, development of learning outcomes, teachers and developers of curriculum, they have a leverage that they can take the call of developing the learning outcome on their own, but based upon the competency. That is something which we have to remember. The following table is an example of learning outcomes derived from the competency, converse fluently and can hold a meaningful conversation in the foundation stage. See, so this is about foundation stage. Okay. In foundation stage, that is from age 3 to 8. Okay, from age 3 to 8.
10 मिनट हो गया करके
There is one particular competency mentioned here, that is converses fluently and can hold a meaningful conversation. So what are the learning outcomes? This is a competency. And what are the like learning outcomes mentioned here for age 3 to 8? Let us see. Listens attentively and speaks in short conversation with familiar people around. Expresses their needs and feelings through short, meaningful sentences. Initiates conversations in daily life with peers and teachers in a variety of school settings. So 3 to 8 means 5 classes, isn't it? So it is like nursery, LKG, UKG, grade 1 and grade 2. Okay. So in nursery, he should be in a position to listen attentively and speak in short conversation with familiar people around and express their needs and feelings through short, meaningful sentences. When he moves to PP1, he should initiate conversation in daily life with peers and teachers in a variety of school setting. He should narrate daily experiences in simple sentences and ask simple questions using what, when, how, and whom. When moving on to PP2, he should engage in conversation based on events, stories, or their needs and ask questions, narrates daily experiences in elaborate descriptions and asks why questions. Moving on to grade 1, engages in conversation, waits for their turn to speak and allow others to speak, engages with non-fictional content read aloud or discussed in class, is able to link knowledge from their own experiences and talks about it. Maintains, in grade 2, maintains thread of the conversation across multiple exchange, engages in discussion about a topic and raises and responds to question. So these are the learning outcomes given for one competency throughout the stage. So throughout the stage, the teacher who is teaching the child in nursery should make sure that in this particular competency of conversing fluently, whether the child has achieved these two learning outcomes. In PP1, she need to check whether he has achieved these two. In PP2, she has to check whether he has achieved these two. The same way in grade 1 and grade 2 as well. Okay, so in this way, age-specific competencies are given for each stage, for each subject, and it's the duty of the teacher should to check whether the child is achieving these things or not. Okay, so you have understood now what is the aims of school education, from which the curricular goals are derived, from the curricular goals, competencies are derived, and from competencies, learning outcomes are derived. So the competency will be same for the whole stage, learning outcomes will change. Okay, teachers, any doubts in this? Till now, was I clear, Chitra ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clear, was I clear? Okay. Now
Yes.
it's time that we go to 3.1.2 from aims to learning outcomes. Okay. How each thing is derived, right? From aims, learning outcomes, how are all the things derived? This NCF strongly emphasizes the importance of the clear flow down that must connect aims to curricular goals, to competencies, to learning outcomes. As we have just spoken, there should be a connection between all these 4 areas in all the stages. Each set must emanate from the immediate level above while ensuring full coverage of the objectives at the higher level. Okay, they are again reaffirming that each one should be connected to the above one. This is the process of breaking down and converting relatively abstract and consolidated notions to more concrete components in order to make them usable in the practice of education. Now we know aims of education, isn't it? We have read in chapter 1, but we don't know how those aims are to be used to develop curriculum. That's the reason they have developed curricular goals, stage-wise curricular goals based upon the aims of school education. Curricular goals are there. What should be the target to achieve? That we don't know. So based upon the curricular goals, they have come up with targets which are nothing but the competencies that are to be achieved in each stage. We know competency. What is the level of competency? That is given in the form of a learning outcome for each class. Okay, so this is a breakdown. It is only such coherence, coverage, and connection arising from a rigorous flow down from aims to learning outcomes, which can align syllabus content, pedagogical practices, institutional culture, and more to achieving what we desire from education. Okay. So only when that particular and proper flow down is there, we can work towards syllabus of the classes, pedagogical practices, institutional culture. All these things we can develop based upon these aims, curricular goals, competencies, and learning outcomes. Otherwise, it is difficult. This is simply because in the everyday life of the teacher and institutions, efforts are should be made towards achieving very specific, observable, and short period learning objectives which are marked as learning outcomes. So every day throughout the stage, the teacher should concentrate upon achieving the learning outcomes. We have to achieve the learning outcomes. Those are our targets to achieve. These learning outcomes arise from the process of flow down described below. They guide the trajectory of educational efforts towards the attainment of competencies, which in turn accumulate to curricular goals. When the achievement of learning outcomes, competencies, and curricular goals are all taken together, they achieve the relevant aims of education. Very simple. You achieve, like 5 stages of learning outcomes, you are achieving one competency. You achieve all the competencies together in that stage, you are achieving one curricular goal. You are achieving all the curricular goals, finally you are achieving the aims of the education as said in chapter 1. This is the breakdown. It's like ascending and descending order. Okay, moving further. NEP 2020 articulated the vision and purpose of education. This NCF has drawn the aims of school education from this particular vision, which informs the knowledge, capacities, values, and dispositions that must be developed in students in order to achieve the aims of education. The aforementioned desirable knowledge, capacities, values, and dispositions are thereby reflected in the aim of each subject of study and also in the recommended school culture and practices. So, all these aims, capacities, values, and knowledge, they are there in every subject. All together, we achieve the aim of school education. The curricular goals are in turn derived from the aims of education along with other relevant considerations. So, curricular goals are developed based upon the aims of education. The competencies are then drawn from these curricular goals, as we have seen, and then the learning outcomes for the competencies. It must be noted that the competencies given in this NCF are illustrative and may be modified by curriculum developers to achieve the curricular goals more optimally based on their context. Okay, so what they have done in NCF, they have given only example curricular goals. But if needed, the people who are developing the content and the curriculum, they can come up with their own curricular goals, or their own competencies and what do we say, learning outcomes, keeping the vision of NEP 2020 in the mind. These are all illustrative. Thus, curriculum developers should carefully consider the set of competencies in the NCF and use these after making relevant changes where and if required. So, the competencies which are mentioned in NCF, they are to be definitely achieved. Keeping that in mind, they have to develop the whole curriculum. Given the relative stability and cross-cutting relevance of competencies across contexts, there may be fewer requirements for changes in the competencies articulated in the NCF. However, decisions on this matter should be carefully considered by the curriculum developers. Okay. Major intention here is that they have to develop the whole curriculum as said by the NCF, okay, without any deviation. Changes can be done, but they shouldn't deviate from achieving the aim of the school education. The learning outcomes can often be more contextual and will therefore require close attention and contextualization for the curriculum or syllabus being developed. Based upon the syllabus, based upon the content, based upon the lessons in the textbook, learning outcomes can be developed. not a problem. But we have to make sure that it is aligned with the curricular goals and competencies and the aims of school education. Thus, the states and their relevant institutions and other institutions responsible for curriculum and syllabus development would need to conduct such a flow down to arrive at a full set of learning standards for their use. So, anyone who is developing the curriculum, after developing the learning outcomes, they have to see whether it is aligned with the competency. After that, they have to see whether that competency is aligned with the curricular goal. And finally, they have to check whether the curricular goal is taking them to the so said aims of school education in chapter 1. So this way they have to check. A cross verification should be done after developing the curriculum. Then only they have to release the books out. Moving further, from aims to curricular goals, let us see how curricular goals are defined from aims. The aims of school education, as envisaged in chapter 1, give direction to the intended educational achievements for the 4 school stages through the aims of each subject. As mentioned earlier, curricular goals to achieve these aims are stage specific. So curricular goals are stage specific. Each stage have a different set of curricular goals. Okay. In this NCF, curricular goals for the foundational stage are defined for the different domains of development. It is appropriate that at the foundational stage, the curriculum is closely aligned with the domains of child development. From the preparatory stage onwards, the curricular goals are defined for specific curricular areas. There is a variation. For foundation stage, we have discussed no developmental domains. They have developed curricular goals for developmental domains for foundation stage. In preparatory stage, they have developed for specific curricular area, which is nothing but the subjects. These curricular areas have been enumerated in chapter 1 along with their aims. In chapter 1, we have seen them already. While the aims of education are the primary source for stage-specific curricular goals, there are 2 other kinds of consideration in arriving at their articulation. The curricular goals are arrived by considering the aims of school education as articulated in the NCF Part A, Chapter 1, the nature of knowledge relevant to the curricular area, age appropriateness specific to the stage of schooling. So all these three things are considered to develop the curricular goals. The aims of school education flow down into curricular goals. Okay, slowly, which means curricular goals which have developed, they are completely based upon the aims, which means once if we achieve these curricular goals, then we are achieving the aims of school education. More specifically, the curricular goals are arrived at from the desirable knowledge, capacities, values, and dispositions within the aims that are relevant to the curricular area and which would contribute to achieving those aims. As we have been discussing since the last 20 minutes, curricular goals are something which help us to achieve the aims of school education. Now, from curricular goals to competencies. Okay, the main thing that we have to remember over here is on what basis they have developed curricular goals. Now, here we are going to see on what basis they are developing the competencies. The 4 main considerations for arriving at the list of competencies are curricular goals which flow down into competencies, research appropriate for the stage and curricular area that informs the choice of content, pedagogy, and assessment. Okay, the curricular area which is giving us the information about choice of content, pedagogy, and assessment, and also experience of various educational efforts in the country. What are the efforts taken in our country? Our context, which includes resource availability, time availability, and institutional and teachers' capacities. So when we are developing the context, we have to keep these things in mind. Like even NCF has given time for the institutions in yesterday's chapter. That's what we have seen. Each stage has its own specific considerations regarding students' development and the increasing complexity of concepts and requirements of capacities. Yesterday, we have seen that as well. As the stage increases, the complexity of the concept also increases and requirement of capacity also increases. These considerations, in turn, have an impact on the choice of competencies within each curricular goal. So we consider all these competencies and then only we develop the curricular goals. All stakeholders in school education should have clarity on the competencies that are expected to be achieved. Okay. So these competencies actually we have to take a printout and we have to give it to the teachers so that they know what are the competencies that are to be developed in that particular stage that they are, teaching. Keeping track on progress in the attainment of these competencies for every student would allow school systems to ensure that all students receive appropriate learning opportunities towards reaching their curricular goals. So once we are achieving the competencies, it is pretty much sure that we are achieving the goals or aims of school education. So teachers should develop their lesson plan based upon the competencies. Now, from competencies to learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are interim makers of learning achievement towards the attainment of competencies. Like competency is the statement, learning outcomes are the measurable outcomes which we can see in the development of the child. They are defined based on the specifics of the socio-cultural context, the materials and resources available, and the contingencies of the classroom. So considering socio-emotional context, materials and resources which are available, and the classroom, the system of classroom, how the classroom, what type of classroom is available. Based upon all these things, they define the specific, learning outcomes for every competency. A set of illustrative learning outcomes have been defined in this NCF based on the broad understanding of the context of our education system. So as per the present education system, the learning outcomes have been developed in this NCF for every competency, which we are going to explore in the further chapters. These learning outcomes need to be seen as enabling guidelines for teachers and school leaders and not as constraining demands on them. They must have the autonomy to reimagine the learning outcomes based upon their context. So these are just illustrative. They are telling that these are the best learning outcomes to achieve. But teachers have the rights to frame new learning outcomes depending upon the context of that particular area where the situation of education changes from place to place, isn't it? It's not the same for the students who are in rural areas like the students who are in urban areas. Okay, so based upon that also teachers can reimagine. So till here, was I clear? Is there any doubt? Is there any need of repetition? So till here we have seen how the flow down is happening from aims of school education to curricular goals, from curricular goals to competencies, from competencies to learning outcomes. So Aarti ma'am, was I clear? Is there any need of repetition here?